I serve at a church just outside of Silver Spring, Maryland, the Spencerville Church. And 6 years ago, a member of the church that I serve at came to me and they said, Pastor, I have a complaint, I have a concern. They said, what I loved about this church for all the years I've been here is that I could go in and out of the church unnoticed. And now, I can't even get through the parking lot without someone saying hello to me. Now people are opening doors for me and welcoming me. This person was serious. They were bothered by this. And trying to be a empathetic and a understanding pastor, even if I did not fully agree, I tried to keep a proper facial expression, but inside I had this joy, and this person that didn't like to be greeted in the parking lot or didn't want people to open doors for them was about to get a hug from their pastor, because 7 years ago when I came to this church, one of the things that people said to me was, Pastor, one of the things that the search committee said was, Pastor, we want to become a more friendly and warm church. And this person was confirming that this was becoming a reality. Being a warm and a friendly church, being warm and friendly individuals as Christians is a wonderful thing. But what I want to talk to you about today is taking it a step further. A lot of people are warm and friendly, but as Christians, we need to move from warm and friendly to caring. If you're watching someplace where you have a Bible, I want to invite you to open it to Luke chapter 8. Luke chapter 8. And while you're doing that, just let me take a moment to say to all of those of you that are watching on Hope Channel or It Is Written TV or Hope Channel Australia, Hope Channel India, Hope Channel International, wherever you may be watching, let me just take a moment to say that if you miss any of the messages through Hope Channel, you can go to the Spencerville Church YouTube page, Spencerville Church YouTube page, and all of our messages, all of our past messages are up there. We'd love for you to take a look and give it a thumbs up. If it's something that you've appreciated, share it with your friends, subscribe to that page. But we're talking today about moving from friendliness and being friendly and warm to being caring, into a deeper intentionality in our relationships. And in the book of Luke chapter 8, I'll begin in verse 40. Now when Jesus returned, a crowd welcomed him, for they were all expecting him. Then a man named Jairus, a synagogue leader, came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come to his house, because his only daughter, a girl of about 12, was dying. As Jesus was on his way, the crowds almost crushed him. Verse 43. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years, but no one could heal her. She came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped. Who touched me? Jesus asked. When everyone around him denied it, Peter said, Master, the people are crowding and pressing against you. But Jesus said, someone touched me. I know that power has gone out from me. And then listen to verse 47. Then the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed. The woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed. Today I want to tell you all that as disciples of Jesus, we should never be satisfied until we are in churches where everyone connected to the church is noticed. We should never be satisfied until we realize that in the churches that we belong to, and in the workplaces that we are at, in the neighborhoods that we are at, that no one goes unnoticed. Sometimes we learn from Jesus' words. Sometimes we learn from Jesus' example. And in this sea of people, Jesus didn't let the one that needed to be noticed go unnoticed. Who touched me? Jesus asked. Luke gives us the response of Peter in a somewhat gentle picture. But Mark, the writer of the gospel of urgency, of bluntness, of directness, Mark paints it much more bluntly. Mark chapter 5 and verse 30. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched me? Who touched my clothes?" And now listen to the indignant response of the individuals with Jesus. Listen to the indignant response of the disciples that were around Jesus. "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered, "and yet you can ask, 'Who touched me?'" Did you hear how they asked that? Jesus, come on. How can you ask, "Who touched me?" Even those that traveled with Jesus, even those that were around Jesus and saw themselves as Jesus' closest followers, his closest friends, they had their eyes closed. It did not see the one in the crowd that needed to be seen the most. Probably most of us that are watching this right now, most of you that are watching this right now, are Christians. You're Christians. And every day we pass people in our neighborhoods, at the stores, in our places of work, at the bank, at our children's schools, that need to be noticed. And we miss them. We miss them. Even maybe worse, many of us who go to church, we come to our churches and there are people at those churches that need to be seen. They need to be noticed. And we miss them. We miss them. Just like the disciples missed that lady. We miss them. Now you might be a person who feels like you've been missed. Like you've never truly been noticed. If that's you, I want you to understand something. Even if those who claim to be closest to Jesus, even if the Christians that you know, even if the church that you've visited, even if you've not felt valued in that space, if you felt isolated and unnoticed during COVID, no one's contacted me, no one cares. I want to say to these people, hear this. There is always at least one that notices you, and that is Jesus Christ. It doesn't give an excuse for all the other Christians not to notice, but I do want you to hear this. If you feel unvalued, you're valued. Jesus notices you. He never misses the one that needs to be noticed. This woman, due to her bleeding condition and the social parameters of her society, was unloved, unvalued, isolated, unnoticed. She felt like she had to be unnoticed or else she would be shunned and rebuked. But Jesus saw her. And Jesus sees every one of you. You never go unnoticed in the eyes of Jesus. Never. Ever. And church, in this story, Jesus is our example. Fellow Christians, Jesus is our example, not the disciples. The disciples don't notice, but we're not looking at Jesus we're not looking at the disciples as true followers of Jesus. We are looking at Jesus. But how many of us are more like the disciples and don't understand how we could be expected to see someone else in this world? Oh, there's so many people. How am I going to see the one that needs to be noticed? Our mission is not to be okay with being unseen disciples. Our mission is to be true disciples and seen as Jesus sees, so that the one that needs to be noticed is always noticed. Now, just in case there's a contrarian watching, just in case there's someone who says, well, of course Jesus noticed. Jesus was divine, and of course Jesus noticed this woman because he says he feels the power go out of him. We don't have that experience. Well, what about all the other times that Jesus noticed when no power went out of him? What about the famous story that if you grew up going to church, you probably heard it many times, Zacchaeus? It's found in Luke chapter 19. And it says there, Jesus entered Jericho, and passing through, a man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. You'd think that person would be noticed, but yeah, he was shunned in his society. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd, and no one was going to move an inch to let this guy be noticed. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today." Well, Pastor Jesus saw him because he was in a tree. He stood out amongst the rest. Okay, well then what about the story in John chapter 5? Afterward, Jesus returned to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish holy days. Inside the city, near the sheep gate, was the pool of Bethesda with 5 covered porches. Crowds of sick people, blind, lame, or paralyzed, lay on the porches. This was a begging spot, a spot for the handicapped, for the homeless, for the suffering to lay. One of the men lying there had been sick for 38 years. When Jesus saw him, remember, they're in a crowd of people. No one now up in a tree, no power going out of him. When Jesus saw him and knew he had been ill for a long time, he asked him, "Would you like to get well?" One person, one of them lying there in the crowd that Jesus knew in a special way, that man needed to be noticed that day. And Jesus noticed. What about Matthew chapter 9, verses 9 through 13? Jesus noticed a sinner that no one thought he would or should notice. Look at this in Matthew chapter 9, beginning in verse 9. As Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth. "Follow me," he told him, and Matthew got up and followed him. Jesus noticed this man that no one thought he should or would notice. The stories are too many. I've only cited a few. I could cite story after story of how Jesus had his eyes open to make sure that no one who needed to be noticed went unnoticed. As we live in the last days of Earth's history, we are called to notice people. Sometimes in my faith community, we are reminded all the time to keep our eyes open to see the signs of the times, the evidence that Jesus is coming soon, and I do believe he's coming soon. I do believe the signs are out there. But sometimes we're looking at all the signs of the times, and we don't realize that what Jesus wants us to do when we see those signs coming is to look around and see the people and see that the harvest is ripe and people need to be noticed. And noticing, folks, noticing in the context of the Bible is caring. It's more than being friendly or warm. It's more than a warm greeting or a hello in a parking lot. Those are good. It's more than a wave as we pass by someone in the neighborhood. Those are good. But each of the stories I referenced today, the woman who was bleeding, Jesus could have just made eye contact with her and given a knowing smile, like, "Hey, I see you, good thumbs up." But he affirmed her. This woman who for 12 years had been unnoticed and unvalued, Jesus stops everything and draws attention to her. So not only that he notices her, but others notice her as well. There's a lady that has some great divine insights, Ellen White, and she wrote this book called Desire of Ages about the life of Christ. If you've never read it, I would encourage you to read it. And she wrote this in that book: "Such trust should not be passed by without comment." He would speak to the humble woman words of comfort that would be to her a wellspring. You know what a wellspring is? That means it just keeps going and going and going. A wellspring of joy. Jesus didn't notice, "Hey, thumbs up, good, I know his power went out of me." No, he stopped and he noticed and he said something, he affirmed her. He connected with her in a special way. In the case of Zacchaeus, also a pariah amongst the crowd that was keeping him from seeing Jesus. Jesus didn't look up and just say, "Hey, good to see you, Zacchaeus, smiled at him and kept going. No, Jesus stops right under that tree, looks up and says, hey, come down here, Zacchaeus. I'm going to hang out with you. I'm going to spend time with you. To Matthew, the tax collector, Jesus not only said hello, he said, hello and follow me. And then the very next verse in Matthew chapter 9 reads like this. While Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, so there Jesus goes again, spending time with these people that he notices. Many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. Jesus went to Matthew's house not only to show him his value, but you know what else happened there? Jesus opened the door so that Matthew's unnoticed friends would also be noticed. Every year on the third Monday of January, we remember Dr. Martin Luther King. And I love watching some of Dr. King's speeches, and you'll see quotes all over the internet, Twitter and Instagram and TikTok and Facebook and all these things acknowledging Dr. King's great work. A quote you may not have heard, but I think applies here from Dr. King was this. He said, true compassion is more than flinging a coin to a beggar. When I speak of no one going unnoticed, I am not just talking about saying hello. You should say hello to everyone, of course. I'm not just talking about waving at your neighbors and smiling at your neighbors. You should, of course, do this. I'm not just talking about letting that person go ahead of you in line at the grocery store. Of course, that's a nice thing to do. But just saying hello, just a simple gesture, a wave, a smile, is like flinging a coin to a beggar. It's better than nothing, but it is not being a disciple. To notice someone as a disciple is to get to know someone. Did you hear what I said? To notice someone as a disciple is to get to know someone, to begin to take an interest in that someone, to care for someone, to truly show that that person is valuable to you. So how do we do this? Well, let's get very practical. Let's get very practical. And what I'm going to share with you is not profound, it's simple. It's accessible to all of us. We do as Jesus did. Two things. The first is something you can do by yourself. In Mark chapter 1 and verse 35, the Bible tells us this. Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. In another part of the Bible, we're told that Jesus often withdrew to spend time in prayer. Folks, I will never, you will never, we will never notice people the way that Jesus was able to notice people if we do not follow Jesus' lead and spend time talking to our Father in heaven in prayer. Jesus, the Bible tells us, did nothing unless he was directed by the Father. That means that when Jesus needs to notice something, it's because God directed him to notice something. Sometimes we look out and we say, I'm too busy. There are too many people. I already have my friends. But if we had the heart of Jesus, if we had spent time like Jesus spent time every single day in the morning, we'd be walking through life and there'd be a voice in our brain saying, notice that person. Look at that person. I want the eyes of Jesus. The Bible says that Jesus passed through all kinds of crowds. I mean, think of all the crowds that Jesus passed through. We pass through crowds and notice nothing except for there's a crowd. But the Bible says that Jesus saw the crowds and he had compassion on them. Why? Because within those crowds he noticed individuals. People who were like sheep without a shepherd. People who were like a child without a parent. People who were like you and I without friends. People who were like those in COVID, isolated and alone. I believe these eyes to see crowds in this way only come as we spend significant day in and day out quality time praying and talking to Jesus and asking for the eyes of Jesus. But then there's a second aspect of not going unnoticed. And it is this: we need to socially engage with others. We can't just wave and say hello and say, well, I'm friendly, so that's all that needs to be done to notice people. No, we have to socially engage with others. We started off this sermon in the book of Luke. In the book of Luke. And in the book of Luke, there are 10 stories of Jesus going to eat with people. And often the people Jesus would go and eat with were people from these crowds, people that he noticed one-on-one. He sees them, he notices them, and then he spends time with them, socially engaging with them. I know during the pandemic that this might not be the most comfortable environment for that. Okay, I understand that. But will you commit in your heart? Will you plan in your heart? Will you make a commitment that once you are comfortable and once your friends are comfortable, you will have people over to your house to eat? You will get a group of friends together, and when the weather is better, you'll picnic outside together. You'll invite some people that you notice at work that don't seem to be noticed. You'll say, hey, let's go to lunch together this week. Social engagement is not a few minutes before or after church. Social engagement is not a quick hello on the street. That is why it is imperative that as we are approaching the last days, that every one of us, everyone who wants to be a disciple and grow as disciples, is connecting in small communities. At our church, we have what we call connect groups. And if you're watching this and you want to connect with a group of online people, reach out to us. If you're willing to be a part of a group or start a group, we'd love to know about that. But you need to be a part of a smaller group than just your local church, or if you're alone, you need to be part of some sort of smaller community. Smaller communities within a larger community is the way that we care for each other. The only way that no one will go unnoticed. We must be more social together. We can look and we can see all the signs of the times. We can notice that there are some people struggling. But then we must move to being more social, to being proactive about being social. That lady that I mentioned earlier, Ellen White, she wrote this in a book called Testimonies for the Church, Volume 6. Christian sociability is altogether too little cultivated by God's people. She wrote this, by the way, at the end of the 1800s. Now think about that. At the end of the 1800s, she said that people are not being sociable enough. This was before we had the devices that we all carry in our pockets that keep us focused downward and not looking at one another. That keep us from saying hello when we're riding on trains together or on planes together. This was before there were garages where people had to park their buggies out front of their homes and get out and mingle with their neighborhoods. Now we can just pull into our garage, close our garage, and no one sees us and walk into our house. This is a time before there was the TVs to occupy our times. And so for social enjoyment, we would go to a local church or a local theater to make sure that we mingled with people. Then she said, at that point in history, she said, Christian sociability is altogether too little cultivated by God's people. Man, I would hate to know what she would think about how we socialize now. By social intercourse, in other words, by social engagement, acquaintances are formed and friendships contracted, which result, listen to this, in a unity of heart and an atmosphere of love, which is pleasing in the sight of heaven. pleasing in the sight of heaven. When God sees us socializing with one another, he is pleased with that. Not sitting in a room listening to a singular preacher, not just watching a preacher on TV, but when we're with one another socializing, God looks down and is pleased with that. Every person on this that is a Christian, and if you're not a Christian, but you want to be a part of the solution of the pain and suffering in this world, know this: it is going to take all of us to make sure that none of us go unnoticed. If we are disciples of Jesus Christ, we will take this mission to heart. We will pray for the eyes of Jesus. We will connect in small communities that care and support one another. And we will make a plan and a commitment. And will you do that even now? To be more sociable, to engage with others. Make a decision today that you will be a disciple that will wake up every morning and pray, Jesus, give me your eyes so that no one will go unnoticed. Make a decision to say, Jesus, give me eyes to see those that need to be noticed, and then to socialize them with them for the glory of God and the growth of his kingdom. Let me pray for you. Jesus, we're in a world right now that is growing more and more alone. Even as we're more interconnected, more and more people are going unnoticed. Not unnoticed by you, but unnoticed by your family, your children. So Lord, all those that are listening to this, that are watching this, that are Christians, help them to make that commitment. To pray for eyes that see the unnoticed. And that will make space in their lives to socialize more. Because this is pleasing in the eyes of heaven. Lord, help us to this end, I pray. And I pray for those that are feeling unnoticed. May they see your eyes and sense your presence even now. And send someone right now. Lord, start them from wherever they're at. Send someone to notice that person that's hurting right now. That they will know that they're loved. In your name I pray. Amen. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, hit the like button here. Subscribe to our page for future videos. Or for the next video, click the box right here.